So, today we'll talk a little bit about meditation again. There was a lot of discussion around it, so thought we can go into it as to what is meditation. So, normally, when we have any thought that is rising in us, the first thing we do is we are always separating ourselves from the thought and we say, I am having this thought. And it's the same thing with feelings as well. If there is, let's say, fear, or if there is anger, or if there is any suffering, we again always instantly remove the me from that and say that I am having suffering, I am having fear, I am having anger. And feelings are nothing but thoughts in a very strong form. They are also coming from the same source of memory. And they have their own energy. Every thought has its energy, every feeling has its energy. But when we separate ourselves from it and we say that I am having this thought or I am having this feeling, the I that is seen as having this thought or having this feeling is what separates us or creates this duality between the thought and the thinker, or the feeling and the feeler. Then we want to do something about that thought or that feeling. We either want to indulge in it or we want to get rid of it. We want to control it, we want to suppress it, or we want to derive pleasure out of it. All this is the movement of the me. So, the me that separates itself from the thought or from the feeling then takes the position of judging the thought, judging the feeling, and based on that, controlling it or indulging in it. And when we come to meditation, then because we are told not to have any thoughts, that becomes a goal for the me. And the me then says, I have to be free of thoughts. So then it does many things, such as either controlling the thought or saying that I'll witness the thought. And even when we say I'm witnessing the thought, what we are not recognizing is that we are still taking a position as me, which is separate from thought. And from the position of the me, we are witnessing the thought. And witnessing of a thought can happen only from memory. And therefore, we think we are just witnessing, but it seems to be a constant struggle because there is duality between the witness and the witnessed. The thought is the witnessed, and there is a witness who's coming up as the me. And this duality continues with the same duality in a different form. And then there is a struggle to remain as a witness now. So we say, I have to remain as witness, but then thought has its own power, it pulls us. So there is this constant back and forth between being a witness and being caught in the thought, without recognizing that both are actually activities of thought. Because when we say I am the witness, we are again caught in thought. It's just a different form of thought that says I am witnessing the thought, or I take the position of the thinker of the thought. So there is the constant movement between indulging in the thought as a me or witnessing the thought again as the me. So this is all what happens in meditation, and that causes a lot of struggle, and it seems like effort, and it seems very difficult, and there is always this constant battle going on. And then there is all the theories we have acquired over time about the nature of pure I as consciousness, as awareness, as simply being. So all that also only takes the form of thought. It's all verbal. So all the verbal content we have gathered, which is nothing but thought, is also part of that whole collection of memory. So then another thought rises and says, I have to abide as being, or I have to abide as awareness. So we again reify the truth as another thought. We make an image out of it, a mental image, and then we say, I have to remain as awareness, I have to abide as the self, I have to simply be. All these statements we might tell ourselves, what we are doing is we are again doing the same activity of thought in a different way. So, this is what's given as a beautiful example of the thief acting as the cop. So, the very thief who pretends to be the cop and says, I'll now catch the thief, is the surest way to never catch the thief, because it's the very thief that's acting as the cop. So, that's exactly what happens for us when the me pretends to be whatever it has acquired through knowledge, through memory, and says, I have to now remain as witness, or sometimes it even affirms that I am the witness, or I am Brahman, I am pure consciousness. And all these affirmations are again taking us only into thought identification based on what we have gathered. So, that which can never be captured by thought, which can never be captured by word, is made into some kind of a goal that again the me projects and wants to abide as. So, this is all what happens, and that's why we face a lot of struggle with meditation, and then there is frustration around it. But there is also the moments of stillness that comes on its own, which gives a taste of it. So, there is something that is recognized, but the me tries to capture it in so many ways, and all of them only leads to frustration. So this is the general expression of many. So when we look into this, the first thing we have to recognize is that the very separation we make from the thought is the source of all our trouble. So when a thought rises, it is a unitary movement. Just as when a perception rises, it is a unitary movement. When there is seeing happening, there is just seeing happening. The entire process of seeing happens spontaneously as one movement. It involves a lot of processes, all of which happens through a spontaneous intelligence of the light hitting the object, and the light then hitting our retina, forming the image, the pattern being recognized. All of this is one integral unitary movement. But we divide it post facto and say that I am seeing the object. We create an I and say, I am seeing the object. Now, for language purposes, for expression, we can say that expression, but we actually believe that there is an I that is seeing the object. And this is why every perception we try to capture into the structure of the me. The structure of the me is built with every perception. So anytime we see something, we want to add it to the structure of the me. I have been there, I have seen that, I have experienced that. I want to see it again, I want to experience it again. So the structure of the me is built by dividing the me from the perception of seeing. Same is true with listening. When we listen to a good piece of music, or when we listen to anything for that matter, even a talk or even a baby crying or anything that there is, we instantly, without, by missing rather the fact that listening is again a unitary movement, we divide the listening into listener and the listened. We say, I am listening, and we create a structure of the me that is listening, and then the whole baggage of the me comes in into the listening, which is to judge the listening, to see if I agree with it, I disagree with it, whether it is right or wrong, whether it agrees with the books I've read. All this comparison goes on, judgment goes on, and this happens in any interaction. As we know, so many conflicts happen because of not listening. When we listen to, let's say, our loved one, or at work or anywhere, we again listen from the standpoint of the me. We take the position of the me. Instantly, when the listening happens, we identify as separate from the listening as the listener. And this listener is nothing but the structure of the me that's built over time. All the psychological memory that has been gathered. So there is naturally the factual memory that's operating spontaneously in listening. So when we listen to, let's say, a speech in English, the memory of the English language, the words, the sounds, all that happens spontaneously. Just as in vision, when we see a phone or when we see the sky, the memory of the sky, the phone, or whatever object is being perceived, that happens spontaneously, recognizes it as such, and that recognition is an integral part of perception. Similarly, with listening, when we listen to something, the language, the content of it, the meaning of the words, all of that is an integral part of listening that happens spontaneously. We can see that right now. But the moment we divide that listening into a listener, which is the me, which has got the background of the knowledge, the memory, the judgments, the experiences, all of that that has been gathered. With that, when we bring that background into the listening, then we divide the listening from being a unitary process into a duality. So this is where Dvaita comes in. So it is not some fancy talk of whether God and me or world. All the speculations are all whether it's duality or non-duality. All of these speculations are all only in the mind. Actually, where duality comes in is this way. When we divide ourselves as the subject who's separate from the object of perception, that subject object duality is the duality that is causing all conflict. And when we point to non duality or Advaita, it is the collapse of this duality. That is what we are pointing to, not some abstraction of all is one and world is Maya. All of that can come out of it spontaneously, the recognition, but not as theory. When we simply make assertions about the nature of truth, whether it's one or two, as a beautiful verse in Ulladu Narpadu also says, all these assertions of whether truth is one, truth is two, whether it's dual, whether it's non dual, whether it's partially dual, partially non dual, Visishta, this, that, all of this is coming only from the mind that wants to speculate. But actual duality comes this way. The speculating mind is the duality because it divides itself from perception, and in that division, there is duality. So, a very simple act of dividing as the seer from the seen is duality. For instance, when there is a beautiful spot we go and see, let's say we go to a beautiful waterfalls or we go to any place, even a tree nearby, if we simply remain as the presence there, the tree being seen happens as a single unitary movement. Or if we go to a very beautiful waterfalls, and sometimes this happens spontaneously when something is very overwhelmingly beautiful, the mind just stops, there is only the seeing. And that seeing is seeing free of duality. When there is no seer, there is only the seeing. But immediately, what happens is almost always the me rises and says, I have seen this and I have to capture it. And that is where nowadays, of course, there is always a desire to capture it as a video or a reel or a photograph. All of this comes because of the me separating itself from the seeing and wanting to capture it as an experience. But actually, when we simply see, there is only silence. That might have been felt by many when, for example, even when we look at a sunset or anything that's especially beautiful, then there is a silence that comes in the very seeing. But we don't live with that silence because we separate from the unitary movement of seeing into the me that sees. And the me is nothing but memory, as we said, which wants to add it to its experience and say, I have seen this. So, the same movement of the me, as we said in listening, it acts even more insidiously because in listening, it brings with it all the judgments, all the comparisons, and that's why listening never, in fact, happens. There is so much books written on listening, and yet listening never happens because of the simple fact that we do not ever listen without the duality of the listener and the listened. When we simply listen with the content that is going into our ears spontaneously, it goes to our heart and it has its own energy, whatever we listen to, and it works in its own way. But the moment we separate ourselves as the listener, then we are not listening at all. We are actually only comparing. We are comparing what is being heard to whether it's right or wrong, whether it agrees or disagrees with what I've heard before. What is the question that I can ask out of this? How can I gather this to fortify my knowledge? So many ways in which the me can come up to hijack the listening into its own agenda. And this is not something that happens only in talks on such abstract topics or on truth, but even in very simple listening. A listening that happens in the house between two people is hijacked by the me, as we well know. That is why the listening never happens and there is conflict due to listening, which results in fights And the same thing happens at work. So many places, listening doesn't happen because the very act of listening is actually a meditation. But we don't listen that way. We bring duality into the listening immediately. So, in the same way, going to thoughts, which is in fact the source of many of this, anytime there is a thought, and even more so when there is a feeling, which is nothing but very distilled thought. So, if there is, let's say, fear rising, it is also thought which has got very powerful energy, what we call as emotion, whether it's fear or anger, any of that has got its own emotion and its own energy, rather, and that is nothing but thought that is crystallized into this feeling or emotion. So, when it rises again, or for that matter, when any thought rises, when we are sitting silently, we again do the same process which we spoke about with perception. Just as in perception, we bring duality of the perceiver and the perceived. Similarly, in thought and action, we bring the duality of thinker and thought. And thought is nothing but the seed of word and action. So, thought alone brings out words, and then that comes out as action. So, then again in speech, we divide as speaker and speech. And in action, we divide as the actor and the action. So, when we sit silently, what we are looking into is this very division. So, the very process of sitting silently is not to acquire anything new, but to recognize the false duality that we are constantly indulging in. And that duality is the source of all conflicts, as we said. So, in order for the whole day to live without duality, when we sit silently, we can look into and test for ourselves how this duality comes forth. That is one way to look at meditation. But instead, what we do is when we sit for meditation, we instantly get identified with the duality as the meditator. We say, I am meditating and I have all this knowledge. I have learned Vedanta, or I have learned Buddhism, or I have learned this or that, and I have heard all these theories, concepts. All of that is operating in my head as the me. And this me says, now I have to realize that. I have to either be nothing or I have to be everything. I have to be Shunya, I have to be Purna. All these words, the verbal soup that we have, comes into life, and we hold up, we say, I have to do all this. So the me instantly takes over the meditation. Rather than looking at the me, which is the essence of meditation, we get identified with the me instantly. And then the me goes about doing whatever it does. Then thoughts come. Then every thought is seen as a distraction, then. Because we have set a goal for meditation that I have to remain silent, or I have to be the witness, or I have to be still, or I have to abide as consciousness, whatever we tell ourselves, that becomes the goal of the me. And because the me has a goal, now every other thought becomes a struggle. Because the thought then comes about what to eat for dinner, or what to do tomorrow, or why is this war happening, whatever thought might come, then, or some feeling may come, which is even stronger, as we said, some feeling of attachment or fear, or some past strong memory that comes as anger. So many things may rise, and everything is seen as a distraction, and there is a constant battle going on between the me who wants to be silent and the memory that's rising as all these thoughts from the ground of the past. So the duality continues in meditation. And then we say, I've read about non duality. I know everything about non duality, but somehow I'm not able to recognize it because the very me that wants to recognize it is the problem that is always getting caught in this duality, in this division. So when we recognize all of this and we sit in meditation, then there is a totally different quality to meditation. First, we don't have any goal in meditation. The moment we have a goal, right there the me comes in and has taken over. So, meditation is that which has got no goal, no motive. It's called in Sanskrit as ahaituki. It's causeless. It has to be without any motive. That is the nature of love too. That is why devotion is also called as ahaituki bhakti, causeless love. When there is motive, it's not love. When there is motive, it's not meditation. So the moment we get caught in any motive, then the motive has taken over, and that's what happens in relationships too. That's why the motive comes and hijacks, and there is no love anymore. Similarly, the motive comes and hijacks, and there is no meditation anymore. So when we remain free of any motive, so we just recognize that any motive is the me. And therefore, when I sit in meditation, I am my only purpose of sitting in meditation is to see this complete disorder that is caused by the me that is ruling our lives in all these ways. So when we take this simple position of just observing, so observation is really meditation. When we observe, then when any thought rises, every thought is coming forth from the same ground of being. Therefore, every thought is a portal into being. As long as we don't divide ourselves from the thought and try to, or rather, get caught in this duality of thinker and thought. Because the fact of the matter is, there is only thought, there is no thinker. So, when a thought rises or a feeling rises, if we simply remain as that thought, which is to say, not observe the thought from the standpoint as a witness, which is to again divide ourselves from the thought and not to have any goal, as already said. But if we simply remain as the thought rises, we don't indulge in the thought, we don't try to control it. See, any action on the thought can be done only when the thinker separates from the thought. When there is absolutely no action made on the thought, including trying to witness it, but there is only the thought that is there, then the very thought, in that total observation without the division as the observer, simply dissolves. That is meditation. When we do not do anything about it, simply remain with the thought, not as I looking at thought, but as just abiding as the thought, then that takes us to the very source of thought itself, which is the silence from which the thought springs forth. So every thought is nothing but an expression of the I thought, and therefore it takes us through that total looking into the thought without any division is to go to the very source of thought. When we ask the question, where is the thought coming from, or where is the I coming from, it is not a verbal question to ask. So in Pancharatnam, there is a nice expression, Ahamiti kuta ayatiti anvishyanta. It says, from where does this I rise? Inquire. So the important thing here to recognize is the I that is rising is the thought, because I am the thought at that moment. When a thought rises, my illusion is that I am having the thought, because I am dividing myself from the thought instantly and saying I am having the thought. But if we don't do that, then I am the thought. The thought is all there is. Whatever I take myself to be, the very brain, the very whole mechanism is nothing but the thought in that moment. So that is the I can know of honestly. I do not know Brahman, I do not know consciousness, I do not know anything. All I know is that thought. If I don't stay, if I don't step away from it, because the thought is a reality, we can see the thought, it is there. We don't have to go into any abstraction of any kind, but we do not have to, or we ought not to divide immediately into the thinker and say that I am having the thought, because there is nobody having the thought except another thought that comes and says I am having the thought. So we move from one thought to another thought by this movement of saying I am having the thought, because the thinker is nothing but thought. When we say I am having the thought, the I that says I am having the thought is nothing but the image that is gathered through memory that wants to take ownership of the thought and divides itself. If we don't do that, if we don't let that me rise in that way and recognize that the thought is the reality of this moment, and we just stay with that thought as one unitary movement, the thought is risen, that's it. Then we just stay with the thought. We don't, of course, indulge in it, because to indulge in the thought again requires us to be the thinker of the thought. Only then I can derive pleasure from following the thought, running behind the thought, all the rest. And to control the thought is to again take an opposite position and fight with the thought, which is also the thinker of a different kind. But if we just remain without doing anything, so that is being still. If we simply remain as the thought, observing the whole energy that is there in the thought, whatever form it has risen in, it reveals itself fully. The form of the thought, the energy of the thought, what it is doing in the whole body, and that whole observation without any division then collapses the entire thing into its source, and there is silence. And if another thought rises, we have the same observation by which we do not divide ourselves, we remain as the thought, and thereby the very thought reveals itself to be nothing but the truth itself, because it is no thought, no feeling, no perception can rise out of anything other than the one source. But by dividing ourselves from it, we take this contrary view. But if we stay with it, and this is to recognize, in another term to put it, the divinity of the power of manifestation. Everything that comes as manifestation is divine. That is why we have the symbolism of the Divine Mother. So every thought is an expression of the Divine Mother. And therefore, if we simply recognize and abide as just the pure observation of the thought, that takes us to the source. But if we either want to use the thought for our pleasure or want to control the thought because of our goal, then we take a partial dualistic view, and that's where we are caught. So This is the whole pointer, is to remain as the thought that rises and see it flower within us, see how it manifests. It's a very beautiful thing to then watch without any movement, just the thought rising, how the field of memory has brought forth and what it is coming up as. And in that very seeing, the whole thing dissolves on its own. It requires us to not move to another thought. So we have to be, that's why, very alert, vigilant, awake. Otherwise, another thought will come, and then we leave this thought and go to the next thought, and then another thought will come. So we keep jumping like a monkey jumps from one branch to another branch. Then no thought will reveal itself. Every thought has the power to reveal the truth if we stay with the thought. But if we jump from one thought to another thought, then we do not see the power underlying the thought. So it is why the example is given of when we dig the earth, if we keep digging in one place, we get water. But if we keep digging here a little, there a little, there a little, we never get to the water. So, in the same way, if we go deep with one thought, that's enough to reveal the truth. But that requires discipline, vigilance, alertness, being awake. When we just stay with the thought, completely remain with total alertness to not allow any other thought just jump here and there, but just remain as this one thought that has risen and just stay with it. Then that very observation of the thought without taking the position of an observer, that reveals the source of the thought, and that dissolves into the very silence of being. And there is silence, which is what we call all the words that we have, the timeless, the source, and all the rest. So that is available only when we don't make it a goal to seek, but let it reveal itself. It never is something that one can attain through effort, but it reveals itself. But it doesn't reveal itself as long as we are caught in the me. So, the way of meditation is to simply remain as this pure observation. So, that's why it is said freedom comes through observation. And so, that pure observation, which takes us into our heart and reveals the very essence of our being, is meditation. All other ways always encourages the duality of the meditator and the meditated. There are all the techniques, all the methods, and various external aids or internal aids people take, and all the rest, but all of that perpetuates this division of the me that is doing the meditation, and there's a duality between the meditator and the meditated. The direct way is to collapse the duality through pure observation. That pure observation, free of duality, is meditation.